So you've lived in Titusville how long now?
I've lived in Titusville since I was born in 1961, so it was 62 years. But I've lived other places in between that time, but no longer than 3 years. I think the longest I was ever away was 3 years, and I lived in Florida, but I moved back to Birmingham about 33 years ago in Titusville, in that house.
So you're living in the house where you grew up?
Yes, I live in the house I grew up in.
Talk to me about growing up in Titusville.
Growing up in Titusville was very unique. We were a very close-knit community. In that area where I live in, there were lots of children. However, the neighbors, we played with the neighbors. We knew our neighbors. We knew the people down the street. So when somebody would pass away, someone would go through the neighborhood, take up money for them, for that family. So we were a pretty close-knit community, playing, didn't really have any fears. If I did, my parents kept me from it. So we were pretty protected.
What did your parents do for a living?
Both of my parents worked in the school system. My father was a tailor, then he was an administrator in a high school, Ullman High School. And my mother was a home economics, foods and nutrition teacher at Western Olin, then Jackson Olin High School.
Your aspirations growing up were what?
I guess when I grew up, I really wanted to be a doctor because that's kind of what everybody wanted to be when they grew up, a doctor or nurse. But I kind of wanted to go in the medical field as a doctor. As I grew older, I realized I didn't really like being a doctor because doctors gave shots, I thought. But, later learning that doctors didn't really give shots. But growing up, I always wanted to be a doctor.
I'll ask this question, but you were Black, and still are Black, of course.
Yeah.
Did you have any reservation about the notion of being a medical doctor?
No, I never had any reservation about being anything. It was whatever I wanted to be, I could be it. There was no reservation regarding color or anything. I never really knew that.
And yet, you grew up in, I won't say a segregated neighborhood, but a neighborhood surrounded by other people who looked like yourself. What was your first experience dealing with people of the Caucasian persuasion?
My first recollection of dealing with people or that were Caucasian would probably be about the 7th grade. My brother and I transferred schools because he was put in a different program. And my parents didn't want to separate us. So he was going to, I believe, I was in 7th grade. So he was going to the 5th grade. And he was put in an accelerated or gifted program. And we were put in a school across town in Eastlake. And at that time, Eastlake was white and Titusville was Black. So that was my first probably real recollection of the difference between white and Black. Because all my teachers were always Black, So
this new experience of having white teachers, was it a shock of any sort?
I don't really think it was a shock because I still had some Black teachers, even though I was going to a white school. Now that was during the time of integration. That integration was pretty much going on. And I had a lot of Black friends. I had a lot of white friends. I would call them friends. So I really wouldn't say that was a difference. I think I had one Black teacher, one white teacher. My band teacher was white, which that was kind of different, but she was a jolly lady, so we never really saw any differences. I think when I really started seeing differences was when I went to high school and encountered white teachers and white students on a larger level.
That high school experience, and you went to what high schools again?
I went to Ramsey High School for my 9th and 10th grade year. And then I went to Parker High School for my 11th and 12th grade year.
You said, of course, that you dealt with white teachers there. Was it always positive?
Most of the time it was positive. I had one really negative experience, and that was not until my 10th grade year. And she was a geometry teacher, and I think that was my first negative experience with a teacher. And wound up getting a bad grade out of there, but by the time that happened, we pretty much knew that summer a lot of turmoil started happening about the schools and changing the demographics of the schools. And so we had to make a choice whether we were going to stay at Ramsey or whether we were going to go to Parker. And to be honest, I was kind of afraid to go to Parker because, again, I had been in a mixed environment, integrated environment, and Parker was not integrated. And so I was kind of afraid to go to Parker at that time because I knew things were going to be a little different again.
Maybe not a fair question, but was there some fear of your own people to some degree?
There was some fear of my own people because I hadn't been around them in a long time. And things were a little bit different at Parker than they were, especially with the band. They were a little bit different. And I think that was where my big hesitation came in. We were just kind of afraid of something new. We went to a lot of different schools growing up, and not because we moved a lot, because we never moved, but just to get us different experiences, I would say. I went to school early, so I really couldn't go to school because of my age, but I was put in different private schools so that I could go to school.
Your times growing up, were they happy times?
Yes, I'd say my time growing up was happy. It was my brother and I, pretty much. We played with each other. We traveled a lot. We had a lot of experiences. We had friends. We had a lot of friends at church. We spent a lot of time at church. So we had a lot of friends at church. We had our neighbors that lived beside us. We didn't really go across the street or down the street. We just stayed pretty much in the vicinity of 3 or 4 houses next to us. My parents were pretty protective, so we didn't go too far where they couldn't see us.
You grew up in what church?
16th Street Baptist Church.
16th Street Baptist Church, which of course is famous, dare I say, infamous for the bombing.
Correct.
Were you there that day?
I was there that day. I was there that Sunday morning, yes. I was at the church.
What are your recollections of that?
I remember being at church that Sunday. I remember something bad going on. I remember the explosion, the loud noise. I remember pieces of the ceiling falling in. And I remember my Sunday school teacher rushing us out one of the side doors. She grabbed us all and rushed us out the side door. I remember frantically looking for my father. I do remember that. Everything else is kind of a blur until I get home. I had a fear of doctors. So at that time, doctors made house calls. So I remember the doctor coming to the house at that time, Dr. Bradford. I think he was pretty much a doctor for a lot of people around. But I remember Dr. Bradford coming to the house. And that's pretty much all I remember for that day.
At what point did you become aware, conscious of the ramifications of what had transpired, the loss of life?
I'll say it was years before I really had the recollection that some people were killed. One of the things that happened in the church, we never really talked about it. We didn't talk about that day. We kind of went on pretty much as if that day didn't exist. So I don't remember and my parents never really talked about it. Now, when we would go out of town to my dad's hometown, which was Lakeland, Florida, the minister at his home church would always ask where was I and have me stand up so he could recognize me. And To me, that was kind of embarrassing because I was very shy. A lot of people don't believe that, but I was pretty shy and didn't really talk a lot. But I didn't want anybody. In a way, maybe I felt that it was kind of, I should have been ashamed of it. I don't know. Because I didn't like people talking about it. And maybe that's because we didn't talk about it at the church.
I would certainly imagine anyone who was there was traumatized to some degree, consciously or unconsciously. Do you think that children and adults truly dealt with what had transpired?
No, I don't think so. I know that I'm still processing the information. I'm still processing that day. As time goes on, I start to figure out, oh, maybe this is the reason that you feel this way about certain things. I have certain fears, and I figure maybe that's one of the reasons why I have or had those fears.
What were those fears?
One that I still have is sudden loud noises, balloons popping, cars backfiring, or something hitting the floor loud, and it startles me. That's one of the biggest ones that I have. One I had growing up was the fear of my parents leaving me. I didn't want to ever be left alone. So, and that's something that I found out or figured out as I gotten older.
I should have asked you this earlier. Your heroes as a child, who were they?
I really didn't have, my parents were my heroes, I guess you could say. My parents were my heroes. There were a lot of people that we were around. I never really knew the significance of how important those people were at that time. Now, as I've gotten older, well, earlier as I've gotten older, and I realized the people that my parents knew, or the people that I knew through my parents, were pretty significant people in the history of Birmingham, some in the history of, civil rights. But my parents were my heroes.
Those notables, who were they?
Clyde Kirby was my Sunday school teacher. And somebody said not long ago, something came up about him, and it was on social media. And I said, oh, that was my Sunday school teacher. And they were like, really? That was your Sunday school teacher? W.C. Patton. All those people went to 16th Street. Dr. Hayes was a friend of my dad's, who Hayes High School, where now Hayes Elementary School, is named after. Miss McCall was my Sunday school teacher, taught me tennis. Even at 80 years old, she was still teaching tennis. So, and I realized these schools are named after people that had a pretty significant history. And, to me, they were just everyday people.
You finished high school what year?
I finished high school in 1978.
78. And after high school, it was not until after high school that you got a job and you worked at Loveland's.
Right.
At that time, was Loveland's a place that blacks frequented in doing shopping?
At that time in 1978, yes. I would say it was pretty much, yes, frequented by blacks. Probably not earlier, but we went downtown all the time to Loveland's, to Pizitz, to Parisian, to do the shopping. My dad loved Loveland's department store and loved Pizitz and loved Parisians. He loved all those stores. He loved to shop. So I never knew pretty much that there was a big difference. A lot of that in my childhood is kind of foggy, but I do know that we went there with, to my knowledge, no problems.
People are aware of, many people are aware of Birmingham's history.
Yes.
Particularly the warts that Birmingham continues to wear. Were you conscious of the demonstrations, the marches, the efforts to dine at certain lunch counters. Did you know about those?
I didn't really know about those. Like I said, my parents were pretty protective. We didn't. They went downtown only when they had to, and we did not really go downtown. I just know of, what I've heard. Some of the experiences that we had, I necessarily didn't know why those things were happening. For instance, going to the restroom. When we would travel, we weren't permitted to go to certain restrooms when we were traveling. And I didn't understand that. All I knew was the restroom that we had to go to, I didn't like the way it looked. And so I would purposely not go to the restroom when we would travel. That way I didn't have to worry about going to the dirty restrooms.
Those dirty restrooms, were there signage there that indicated who could use those facilities, or perhaps on other facilities who could not?
I'm sure there were, but I didn't see them. I don't remember seeing them. All I remember was my parents would say, we have to go to this restroom, and we would go to that restroom. And then I would say, I don't have to go.
What about restaurants, as you were traveling, or perhaps even in Birmingham? Do you recall instances where that was, well, simply put, not as it is now?
We didn't go out to eat. My mom was a cook, and we just didn't go out to eat. They never said that we couldn't go out to eat. We just never went out to eat. So I didn't see any of that.
In hindsight, now, and obviously your mom being a person who taught people how to cook, so obviously you feasted on incredibly good meals. But you think the other reason that you didn't go out to eat was because they knew what was out there? Probably. I never thought of it that way, but probably yes. That's probably why we didn't. We didn't go out to eat, no. I remember one time when McDonald's on 6th Avenue was there. I was a little girl, and I'd had a traumatic experience where I saw a snake. And I cried and cried and cried. I think my parents finally said, well, let's go to McDonald's. And so we went to McDonald's, and we ate outside. So that was, again, when I was a little girl. So I don't know if it was we ate outside because it was a nice day, or we just couldn't go inside to eat. Somewhere in the material that you gave to Paul, and thank you for that, there was some mention, I'm not sure when it was, when a teacher, I think, told you what you couldn't do. When was that? And tell me about that, please. When I started working at the University of Montevallo, which was in 1993, I eventually had to work on my doctorate degree. And to work on that doctorate degree, I had to go to the University of Alabama, which I had gone to the University of Alabama when I first graduated from high school. That's where I went to school for 2 years. And so in going to the University of Alabama, I needed a degree in special education with concentration in speech pathology. And I had difficulty getting into school. And when I finally got into school, I needed certain classes in that department of speech pathology. And so I called the chair of that department at that time to discuss with him what classes I needed and how could I take those classes and what did I need to do. And after I finally got to him, he told me that he didn't know who I was, and as far as he was concerned, I would never get a degree from the University of Alabama. So that was very hurtful. I had never been told what I couldn't really do, especially go to school,
because I've always been able to go to school wherever I wanted to go to school. So I think that kind of lit a fire up under me to say, who are you to tell me what I can't do? And you don't even know who I am. How can you tell me what I can't do? But that's what he told me. I would never get a degree from that school. And 4 years later, I have a degree from the University of Alabama.
So his forecast that you would never get a degree didn't impede you?
No, it probably made me more determined to get that degree. I found a way to get those classes because at that time I could transfer classes. And so my professor at Montevallo made sure that I was able to take those classes there and then transfer them to the university. And the rest of my coursework was at the university.
At what point did you become aware of, and it may not have been until beyond high school and in college, that you became aware of a color line, that there was a difference between what whites were thought to be able to do and what blacks were perhaps permitted to do?
I probably became aware of that color line in elementary school when I transferred to Robinson, but it really became apparent and hit home, I guess, when I went to the University of Montevallo, because I was only one person. I was the only African American in that program at that time. Of course, by that time, others came, but I was one of very few. So I think that's when it became apparent that, you know, there is a color line here and you've been protected most of your life from it. But now here you are and you're not protected. You need to protect yourself. That made me want to excel more.
In other words, the resistance made you push harder.
Yes. And I was always told, you know, you need to work a little bit harder.
Did your parents explain why you had to work harder?
They never really explained why I had to work a little harder. They tried to bring me up as, I guess you would say, normal as possible without any differences, unknowing differences, even though there were differences out there. I guess coming up at a time when segregation was ending and integration was beginning was kind of a challenge just to keep things as normal as possible. My dad was administrator, as I said, at Ullman. And during that time of integration, when they closed Ullman, he was sent to Phillips High School. And he was one of the first black administrators, if not the first black administrator there. And then he experienced a lot of hate because of skin color. So I guess in that time also, but they never really explained to us that that was why. And he just said that people didn't look at him the same way as they did when he left Ullman.
Do you remember, I think it was literally Alabama history book, right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
When you were in a middle school grade. Are there aspects of that now, as you think back on them, that didn't actually tell, as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story?
Yeah, and that's probably ninth grade when I took Alabama history. I would say a lot of it was left out or incomplete. Not the way I saw things. Yes.
I want to say some names, and repeating the names, if you could tell me your recollections of what you know or perhaps feel about them.
Okay.
Bull Connor.
Bull Connor, commissioner, that's right, commissioner of police. When I think of hear his name, I think of fear, terror.
Freedom Riders.
Freedom Riders. Freedom Riders, people that were there, black, white, whatever, trying to get freedom for all people, looking for justice.
Emmett Till, or more specifically, the murder of?
Wasn't really knowledgeable about Emmett Till until reading about it in school. My parents didn't talk about it, no, so what I know about him would be what I've read or heard then, because that would have been the same time that I was young.
The Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth.
I did not know Reverend Shuttlesworth personally. My parents knew him. I did not know him personally, but I hold him in high regard as a brave person. I met him before he passed. When I taught at the University of Montevallo, I was over Black Heritage. I was over the Black Heritage Committee for the university. And one of my mentors there, Ms. Elaine Hughes, had Reverend Shuttlesworth honored during that time because she was a student at Phillips High School when he was beat up, when he was trying to get his kids there. So I did have the opportunity to meet him.
When your father was an administrator at Phillips, were you conscious of the path that had been paved for blacks going there?
I was not conscious of it. I knew that he had a lot of animosity and there were a lot of problems with him being there. And it caused him a lot of stress. And but I was not aware of what had happened there until later.
George C. Wallace.
Never met Wallace. Never really saw him in person, but I do know the significance of what he did at the University of Alabama. I remember when he was shot while he was running for president. I do remember that. But segregationists, hateful, that's what I see when I hear him. I know that he repented in his later days, but yeah.
The assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy.
For President Kennedy, I was young. I was 2 when he was killed, so I was not really aware of anything until, what was being said as I got older and learned about it.
I'm going to drop a name that you may or may not know. Bill Terry Jr.
I do not know Bill Terry Jr. I do not know that name.
Bill Terry Jr., let me ask, do you have any family members who are buried in Elmwood Cemetery?
My parents.
You have Bill Terry Jr. to thank for?
He was remember his name. He was the soldier that was killed in Vietnam, and they marched down the street to bury him at Elmwood.
Do you remember that march?
I do remember that march a little bit. It was on horseback. I mean, not horseback. He was in a horse and carriage, was he? I know they walked.
Well, they did walk. There was a picture from the Birmingham News on that day. I think it was 1970. The I think it was late 1969 that the Supreme Court ruled in his family's favor.
Right.
That his life for his country should be able to be buried wherever he wanted. So, despite Elmwood and other cemeteries having a color line that went to the grave, they said, no, you can't do that.
Right.
Such a thing.
And I do remember saying, I don't understand why people can't be buried in the same cemetery. I do remember having that discussion with my parents.
As one who grew up in Titusville and lives here now, how has life in Titusville changed?
Life in Titusville has been different from when it was when I grew up because people don't know people like they used to. I'll give you an example. The neighbor behind me, the one that was previously there, the original neighbor there, we would go across the fence. We could go through the fence, and we play in each other's backyard. But now and of course there were fences built during the years that you couldn't do that. But if we needed something, we just go, we talk across the fence. I don't know who that is now who lives behind me, and they've been back there over a year, probably 2 years. My next door neighbors, I could walk across the yard to go from one neighbor's house to the other neighbor's house. I don't feel like I could do that now. I have to go down the driveway, down the sidewalk. So we aren't as close as what we used to be. We don't know our neighbors. A lot of our neighbors don't look like us anymore. My next door neighbors are Hispanic. They're great people, but they're Hispanic. I have about the neighbor behind me, they're Caucasian. So it's a diverse neighborhood, but we don't know each other. I can't go next door and say, can I borrow a cup of sugar?
I know you said you live on Goldwater Street. Are you in North Titusville, South Titusville, or Woodland Park?
I'm considered South Titusville. South.
So you're between Green Springs Avenue and 6th Avenue?
Correct.
Okay. Is Titusville as good as it was when you grew up? Is it better or not as good?
I'll say not as good as it was. Sometimes there's that fear. You'll hear gunshots. You hear signs of violence. There was an instance where some neighbors got into a fight a few years ago, and the police were called, and the policeman was attacked, and they shut down our whole street. We never heard of that before. So I'm not going to say I'm fearful of going out all the time, but at certain times of night, I get a little hesitant, more so than when I was growing up.
Is that because of the innocence of youth or the change of your world?
It's the change of the world. It's not the innocence of my youth, I don't think. It's the change of the world.
I've talked to people, specifically Bill Terry's sister, who passed away earlier this year, as a matter of fact. When I spoke to her a year ago, she recalled her father being among the men who would patrol the streets because they wanted to make it clear, you're not coming into our neighborhood and disrupting things. Do you have any consciousness of any of that?
I don't have any consciousness of that. I know that there were neighborhoods that we were told that we couldn't go in or we shouldn't be in. But I don't remember people patrolling now. I do remember times when my dad would go up and down the street, but I didn't know that was what it was for, maybe. And I knew the men in the neighborhood would talk about protecting the neighborhood, but I didn't understand why.
What do you think about white people, and do you know any white people? And I know nowadays that seems like a foregone conclusion, but again, back in the day, that was a significant deal.
Yeah, that was a significant, yes, I do know many, many white people. I have, my son actually went to school in what we call predominant school. I sent him to school in Vestavia because I thought that at that time, what he could get in Vestavia was better than what he could get and what he needed. So I don't dislike white people. I don't dislike people because of the color of their skin or because of their nationality. So some of my good friends are white. One of my best mentors, or two of my great mentors, were white at the University of Montevallo, both as I was a professor and as I was a student. So yeah, I don't have any hard feelings because of color of skin, no.
You talked about, of course, having been at 16th Street Baptist Church, more recently at 6th Avenue Baptist Church. The Bible stories of Jesus. Jesus loved the little children, all the little children of the world, red, yellow, black, and white. Looking back at Birmingham in your youth, maybe not directly touching you, but looking back on it, might one have reason to question that assertion?
I still question that assertion because racism still goes on. And a lot of people who claim to be Christians are the ones who I see as some of the big racists. And so how can you claim to be a child of God yet dislike this other person who's a child of God, because God created us all and because of the color of their skin? So sometimes I do wonder what did we look like? Did we look like Christians, or are these people pseudo-Christians?
My dad used to make a distinction between Christians and church folk.
Okay, right.
Now, he would often say, referring to the weather of today, it would only take 7 drops of rain to keep 15 church folk.
Right.
They weren't venturing out. But that, basically, he was talking to us about us. But as we talk about that difference, the different world that whites had versus what was envisioned for blacks. And I know you said that your early aspiration was to go into medicine. You subsequently became an instructor, a teacher, specializing in speech pathology. Had you said, I want to be president of the United States, what do you suppose your parents might have said?
That's a good question. I don't know what they probably would have said. Are you sure that's what you want to do? Because that's what they always are. Are you sure that's what you want to do? And they probably would have said, go for it. Because they didn't think that we couldn't do whatever we wanted to.
But the reality was that, and I think back to the brilliance of Barack Obama's campaign for president, the first one. The slogan, yes, we can.
Correct.
Because up until that point, we hadn't.
No, we hadn't. No, right.
And it still I wouldn't say baffles me, but it still impresses me that he was able to say plant a seed that could be cultivated and grew into a victory. What do you remember, and this fast forwards several years, or rather several years from your youth, but obviously not as far forward as Barack Obama, when Richard Arrington ran for mayor of Birmingham? What do you remember about that?
It's kind of fuzzy, but I do remember him running for mayor and him being the first black mayor. We were behind him, I know that much. But I guess all the talk was a black man shouldn't be the mayor of Birmingham. But by that time, a lot of the people who were living in the city were black. All the whites had moved away or moved out of the city into the suburbs. So it was pretty much, why can't he? Most of the people that live here are black anyway.
Did anyone in your family ever work in the mines?
No. My family here consisted of my mother, my father, my brother, and myself. And that's the only family we have.
Sure. Okay.
Here.
Some of these questions may be borderline unfair, but I'll ask anyway. Why do you think whites white people fought so hard against integration?
I think it was fear.
Of?
Fear of, I think they fought so hard against integration because it was fear of us being able to have an equal part or be equal to them. They didn't feel like or felt like that they would lose something, fear that they would lose something, lose power, or people would become equal to them, sitting in the same boardrooms they were, sitting in the same classrooms. I think there was fear, and then a lot of times I think it was just plain ignorance. They just didn't know. They were only going on what somebody else had told them previously, not from any knowledge that they had.
You talk about fear. Fear perhaps that they might not measure up if the playing field were level, that they might be the ones then excluded.
Or they're exposed. Yeah, fear of exposure. I think that what a lot of them really didn't have would come to light. A lot of them were not, quote unquote, maybe as smart as we thought they were.
And once the light was shined on them, they, like you said,
The exposure, right.
you of course have two adult children. Tracy, 33, Thomas, 25. Do you have grandchildren?
I do not.
You do. Okay.
Not biological grandchildren. I've adopted two, a 6-year-old and a 7-year-old, that are the children of one of my daughter's friends.
Okay. So you were raising them?
I'm not raising them, no.
Oh.
Their mother is raising them.
Okay.
I just act as a grandparent.
How old are those children?
They're 6 and 7. The little girl is 6 and the little boy is 7.
What have you told them? What might you tell them about the Birmingham of your youth?
I think I would tell them that they have a lot of opportunities now that I may not or may have had that I didn't know about. As I stated earlier, my parents did not really tell us there was nothing we couldn't do. They may not have taken us certain places because they didn't want us exposed to that or hurt from it, but that there are many opportunities out there. They can go anywhere they want to. They can do anything pretty much in Birmingham that they want to. If they can't, is not because the opportunity is not open to them, that everything is open to them, whereas it may not have been open to me.
And yet, nobody, not your parents, not your teachers, not your principal, not your Sunday school teachers.
Nobody ever told me there was a limit.
Is that the greatest gift they gave you?
I think that is the greatest gift they gave me. I think when I started thinking about, oh, I can't do that, that was something I put on myself. But as I go back and think about it, my parents never put a limit on what I could or could not do.
I imagine that there'd been temptation for them to say that. That again, they weren't blind to the world in which they were raising you, so they knew that go down the wrong corner and things could be
different.
Bad,
yeah,
very bad for you.
Very bad, correct. And I'm sure that my experience in the bombing probably brought a lot of that to light, because I think about it. I said, if I was a parent and my child was there and that happened, what would I do? Would I keep them in the house forever, not let them go anywhere? And they didn't keep us in the house forever, but I know that, and my friends at times would say, my parents were strict, they didn't let us go anywhere. I didn't say they were strict, they didn't let us go anywhere. I just felt like they were protecting us, and they didn't want anything to happen to us. And they didn't necessarily say, you can't go downtown because, you may get hurt, or because you're black and blacks can't go. We just didn't go. They provided other opportunities where we wouldn't have to ask those questions, I guess.
All children grow up to some degree with a notion of the boogeyman. For black folks, was the boogeyman real?
The boogeyman really was real. The boogeyman really was real. He was lurking out there. We didn't know where he was. But if we went into the wrong place, we'd find him. Or he would find us.
And yet, you were raised to go out and face the world, even though it's a world where the boogeyman or boogeymen were present.
Right. They never told us, like I said, that we had limits and that things weren't due. I think a lot of fears were brought on by ourselves. I think a lot of my fears, as I've gone back and looked at my childhood, came from being in that bomb. And the fear of not being able to find the person I was looking for, or the person not being able to find me, and no telling what would happen to me. I think that's where a lot of my fears came from, and probably hindered me some from doing some things that I may have wanted to do, because I had a fear of leaving.
Leaving as in leaving home, leaving where, going where?
I had a fear a long time of leaving home. It was hard for me to go to school. I would hide. I remember hiding when it was time to go to school, and my parents would have to look for me. I remember hiding one day in my mom's car because I knew she had to go to work, and if I hid in her car, then she would take me on to work with her. So those kind of things.
How were you when you hid in the car?
Probably about 5 years old, probably. About 4 or 5.
You lived in the house when you grew up.
Yes.
Is there a little bit of that fear to leave in you still?
No, because I've had to leave and go so many places now that it doesn't really bother me. If I have to go somewhere really strange or different, I pretty much go, okay, you can do it, you've done it before, and go on. It's a fleeting thought.
I presume from the risk bracelet you have and that, because I think it says something you volunteer with the sorority, and obviously the green color that you are a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority.
Yes.
Okay. Again, just kind of present.
Yes. I'm a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, yes.
Okay. I think that there is an auxiliary of the sorority that mentors young girls. Are you familiar with that? There are various chapters in the city. There are 5 chapters in the city, and one of our targets is mentoring young people. So we've had different targets throughout the years. Whenever we get a different international president, our focus changes for those 4 years. But there's always been some aspect of it to mentor young people, young women. Is the challenge of mentoring children, young women, easier now because the doors are not so firmly shut? Or is it more difficult because the doors are so wide open?
I think it's more difficult now than it was then. A lot of students now, they need mentors, but because, I don't know why, but maybe because there are so many different things out there, so many, and I say things out there, that can deter people, young people, that is, we are challenged by the social media, by the internet, by all of those things, whereas when I was growing up, or even when I was teaching school, there were not all those distractions.